The morning sun had barely risen when Maya James laced up her sneakers, double-checked her backpack, and kissed her father goodbye. At 12 years old, she was the kind of student teachers remembered: sharp, observant, respectful, and always curious. Her father, Judge Marcus James, had taught her to love the law, not just as a set of rules, but as a structure of fairness, history, and reason. That morning, Maya was especially excited. Her class was beginning a new unit on the U.S. Constitution, and she had spent the night before poring over one of her father's old casebooks. She even copied down a few lines from a ruling he had written, one he had carefully explained to her during dinner, connecting the 14th Amendment to modern civil rights. When she walked into Ms. Coleman's sixth-grade classroom, she had no idea how quickly things would shift. Ms. Coleman was in her late 40s, firm in her tone and traditional in her methods. She didn't particularly care for students who challenged her authority, and Maya, with her precise vocabulary and inquisitive questions, often did just that, not with rudeness, but with knowledge. And sometimes that was enough to be seen as a threat. That morning, as the class discussed equal protection under the law, Maya raised her hand. "My dad told me about a case he worked on," she said. "It was about a school treating students unfairly based on how they looked. He said the judge ruled it was a violation of the 14th Amendment." Ms. Coleman looked up slowly. "Maya, that's not what your textbook says. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship and due process. Let's stick with the material." "But it does include equal protection," Maya said carefully. "That's what my dad explained. He, he's a judge. He even wrote an opinion about it." There was a pause. Then came the tight, dismissive smile. "I think you've misunderstood," Ms. Coleman said, "and please don't make up stories. We can't have disruptions." The room went still. Maya's face flushed with heat. Her voice caught in her throat. She wasn't making anything up, but the certainty in Ms. Coleman's tone made her feel as though she had done something wrong. The other kids looked around awkwardly. No one came to her defense. "I'm not lying," Maya said, more quietly now. "That's enough, Maya," the teacher snapped. "We'll speak after class." And with that, the conversation moved on, leaving Maya sitting in silence, her heart pounding in her chest, the injustice of the moment burning behind her eyes. She stared at her open notebook. The quote from her father's ruling, written in her neat handwriting, suddenly felt like a secret she should have kept. But she knew the truth. And soon, so would Ms. Coleman. By the time the bell rang for recess, Maya's name was already printed on a pink slip and placed on the teacher's desk. Detention, disruption slash dishonesty during class discussion. Ms. Coleman handed it to her with a cold, practiced motion, as if the paper were routine. Maya took it silently, her fingers trembling as she read the accusation. Dishonesty. That word stung more than anything. In the hallway, Maya kept her head down. She didn't talk to anyone. Even the few classmates she usually shared jokes with at lunch avoided her now, unsure of what had happened or what side to take. Rumors were already spreading. Some said she argued with the teacher. Others claimed she made up a story about a fake judge dad. All of it felt surreal. The detention room was nearly empty when Maya arrived. A bored assistant sat at the front, clicking through emails. Maya found a seat by the window, pulled out her notebook, and opened to the page where she had written down the quote her father shared. "Equal protection under the law does not exist unless we apply it, especially when it's difficult to do so. Judge Marcus James." She stared at the words, her chest tightening. They weren't just scribbles. They were real. Her father had written them. She had seen the case online. She had lived the lesson in their dinner conversations. But somehow, that truth didn't matter in Miss Coleman's classroom. Because she was a kid. And maybe because she was black. That night at the kitchen table, she finally showed the detention slip to her father. He read it once, then again, slowly. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he set the paper down carefully and looked her in the eyes. What happened? Maya told him everything. The quote, the dismissal, the accusation. She tried to stay strong, but her voice cracked by the end. She had never seen her father truly upset before, not like this. He wasn't furious. He was disappointed in the world. He picked up the slip and folded it into his jacket pocket. "I'll take you to school tomorrow," he said calmly. "Are you going to talk to Miss Coleman?" "Yes," he said, standing. "And I'm going to wear my robe." Maya blinked. "Your judge robe?" He gave a small, firm nod. "It seems it's time she learned who you were speaking for." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving Maya stunned, breathless, and for the first time since the incident, hopeful. The next morning, Maya stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hands clutched tightly around the straps of her backpack. She had barely slept, her thoughts spinning between fear and pride. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "I'm going to wear my robe." She hadn't dared imagine what that would look like, or what it would mean. Downstairs, Judge Marcus James was already waiting by the door. He was dressed in his usual charcoal gray suit, but draped neatly over his shoulders was the unmistakable black robe of his profession. It looked almost too grand for the hallway of their modest home, the kind of robe meant for towering courtrooms, not elementary school hallways. "You ready?" he asked, smiling gently. Maya nodded, her heart thudding. The drive to school was quiet. Not heavy, just thoughtful. He didn't give a lecture. He didn't rehearse a speech. He didn't need to. His presence alone said everything. When they pulled up to the curb, parents and students were milling about as usual. But as Judge James stepped out of the car, robe billowing slightly in the morning breeze, a hush seemed to ripple outward. Conversations faded, heads turned. Maya walked beside him, her spine a little straighter than the day before. For once, she didn't shrink in the hallways. She felt seen. By the time they reached her classroom, the air was thick with silence. Students were already seated. Miss Coleman was scribbling something on the whiteboard when she noticed the figure in the doorway. She turned, and her eyes widened. "May I have a moment with the class?" Judge James asked, his voice deep but composed. Of course," Miss Coleman stammered, stepping aside. He walked slowly to the front of the room, the hem of his robe brushing the floor. His gaze swept across the room, not with judgment, but with calm authority. "My name is Marcus James. I'm Maya's father. I'm also a sitting judge on the State Superior Court." A collective gasp rippled through the room. A few students sat up straighter. "Yesterday," he continued, "my daughter shared information about a ruling I made from the bench. Information that was factually correct, grounded in constitutional law, and, more importantly, deeply meaningful to her." He paused. "And yet, she was accused of lying." "Of making things up, miss." Coleman stood stiffly to the side, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I wear this robe every day in a courtroom to uphold justice," Judge James said, his voice unwavering. "But justice doesn't only live in courts. It must live in classrooms too, especially when young black children speak with clarity and truth and are silenced." He turned, locking eyes with Miss Coleman. "And especially when the truth is inconvenient." The room was silent. No one breathed, not even Maya. Then, slowly, her father turned back to the class. "My daughter told the truth. She did not need this robe to validate her, but I wore it today to make sure you all understand. Her words carry weight, with or without my title." He gave a small nod to the class, and then he looked at Maya and smiled. Not the smile of reassurance, but of recognition. The smile that said, "You stood your ground. Now I've stood with you." As he exited the classroom, silence lingered. But it wasn't discomfort anymore. It was respect. And Maya, for the first time all week, felt taller than the chalkboard behind her. The news traveled through the school like wildfire. By lunchtime, nearly every student and teacher had heard about the judge in the black robe who walked into Ms. Coleman's class and called out injustice in front of 26 sixth graders. Some exaggerated the story, saying he slammed a gavel or threatened to shut the school down. But Maya knew the truth, and the truth was powerful enough without embellishment. In the main office, Ms. Coleman sat stiffly across from the principal, Mrs. Delaney. Her lips were pursed, hands folded tightly in her lap, as she explained the situation through a clenched jaw. "She disrupted my lesson," Ms. Coleman insisted. "I didn't know who her father was." "That's irrelevant." "It's not about who her father is," Principal Delaney replied evenly. "It's about how she was treated." We're educators. We ask students to think critically, and when they do, we need to reward that, not punish it. Miss Coleman opened her mouth but said nothing. Later that afternoon, Maya was summoned to the principal's office. She walked in slowly, unsure of what to expect. Mrs. Delaney greeted her with a warm smile and invited her to sit down. "Maya," she began, "I want to apologize." Maya blinked, caught off guard. "You were right," the principal continued, "about the law, about the case you mentioned, and about how you were treated. Your father's visit reminded us that truth should never be punished, especially in a classroom." Maya's eyes stung. She nodded, saying nothing. "We're going to remove the detention from your record. But more importantly, I've spoken with your teacher. She understands that what happened was wrong. She'll be addressing the class tomorrow." Maya looked up. "Will I have to say anything?" "Only if you want to," the principal said gently. That night at home, Maya told her father what happened. He listened silently, nodding occasionally. When she told him about the apology, he didn't gloat or celebrate. He simply said, "I'm proud of you." "For what?" Maya asked. "For knowing the truth when someone tried to bury it. And for holding your ground?" Then he added, "And remember, you won't always have me walking behind you in a robe." Maya smiled. "That's okay. I'm learning how to stand on my own." The next morning, Maya's heart thudded as she walked into class. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, not from books, but from anticipation. She didn't know exactly what Miss Coleman would say. Would she apologize? Would she pretend nothing happened? Would she find some way to shift the blame again? The classroom was quieter than usual. Some students gave her curious glances, others simply watched. No one teased her this time. The story had made its way through every grade level. Kids in higher grades whispered things like, "That girl's dad is a real judge," and "She told the truth, and the teacher got schooled." But all Maya wanted was fairness, not fame. Miss Coleman entered the room a few minutes after the bell. Her face was tight but not angry. She looked tired, maybe thoughtful. She stood at the front of the class and waited until everyone was quiet. "I want to speak to you all," she said, voice steady, "specifically about something that happened earlier this week." Every head turned to Maya, but Ms. Coleman kept her gaze to the room at large. During our discussion on the Constitution, Maya shared a personal story and insight about the 14th Amendment. At the time, I dismissed what she said. I told her she was wrong. I accused her of being dishonest. She paused, her hands clasped. "I was mistaken." The words landed heavily. Even Maya, who had prepared herself for an apology, wasn't ready for how quiet the room became. "Maya was telling the truth," Ms. Coleman continued. "Her father is a judge." What she shared was accurate, and regardless of who her father is, she deserved to be listened to with respect. Just like every one of you. Maya felt her fingers unclench slowly under her desk. "I've always believed in teaching facts," Ms. Coleman said. "But sometimes, we forget that facts come from lived experiences too. And when those experiences challenge us, we should listen, not silence." She turned toward Maya, this time making direct eye contact. "I'm sorry, Maya." The room was still. Then, slowly, Maya gave a small nod. "Thank you," she said softly. Miss Coleman turned back to the class. "Now, we're going to revisit that conversation about equal protection under the law. But this time, we're going to do it differently. Maya, would you be willing to help us understand your father's case? And maybe even what it meant to you?" The room turned again toward her. For a moment, Maya hesitated. Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out her notebook, and stood. "I'd like that," she said. And for the first time in 3 days, she wasn't afraid to speak. Maya stood in front of the class, her notebook open, palms sweating slightly. But the fear that had gripped her just days ago was gone. In its place stood something new. Not arrogance, but strength. She read the quote from her father's ruling aloud, her voice clear and steady. "Equal protection under the law does not exist unless we apply it, especially when it's difficult to do so." There was a quiet hum in the room, the kind that follows when someone says something real, and it lands deeply. "I asked him what that meant," Maya said, looking up. "He told me it means the law doesn't just protect people when it's easy. It has to protect people when it's uncomfortable, when they're different, when they're not believed. She paused. Like what happened here? Miss Coleman gave a subtle nod from her desk, her eyes trained on the floor. The weight of Maya's words seemed to sit on her shoulders too. One boy in the back, Jordan, who always cracked jokes, raised his hand. So, like, you weren't making it up? You really read your dad's ruling? Maya nodded. It's online. He explained the whole case to me. It was about a school that was giving unfair discipline to kids of color. A lawyer sued the district under the 14th Amendment, and my dad ruled that the school had violated the students' rights. Several heads turned with interest now. Wait, another girl said. So your dad made them change the school rules? Not just that, Maya said. He ordered the school to apologize publicly. He said that justice includes accountability. Even Miss Coleman looked up at that. For the next 10 minutes, Maya talked about the case, about what she had learned, how it felt to see her father write something that made change. Her classmates weren't just listening, they were engaged. Some of them started asking questions. Others began drawing connections to their own experiences, times when they felt overlooked, ignored, or misunderstood. And for the first time, Maya realized something powerful. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. After class, as students packed their things, a few approached her. Hey, said Jordan, scratching the back of his neck. Sorry for not saying anything the other day. It's okay, Maya said. You're cool. And your dad's a badass. Maya laughed, the tension finally broken. Another girl, Emily, leaned over. My brother got suspended last year for something a white kid only got detention for. I wonder if that case your dad ruled on would have helped him. Maybe, Maya said. You should ask your mom to look it up. That afternoon, Maya walked out of school not with shame, but with respect, and not just from others, from herself. Maya sat at the dining table, a glass of juice in front of her, and her worn-out notebook resting open beside it. She had reread her notes 3 times already, partly out of pride, partly because the events of the day still didn't feel real. Her father walked in, setting his briefcase down gently near the door. He had just come from court, but the way his shoulders relaxed at home made him seem less like a judge and more like a dad again. You changed out of the robe, Maya teased, smiling. It's not exactly dinner attire, he replied, loosening his tie. But I heard you made quite an impression today. Maya shrugged, trying to sound casual. Some kids apologized. Some asked questions. Miss Coleman, too. Did it feel good? She paused, then nodded. Yeah, but not because they apologized. Because I finally got to tell the whole story, and they listened. He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. You see, Maya, he said softly, when people see someone like me, a black man in a robe, they don't always know what to make of it. And sometimes, when they see someone like you, a young black girl speaking truth, they push back, not because you're wrong, but because you make them confront something they weren't ready to see. Maya looked down at her notebook. So, what do we do about it? We keep speaking, he said, resting a hand over hers. And we keep showing up, in courtrooms, in classrooms, in meetings, in positions of power, until our presence is no longer questioned, until our truth doesn't need to be proven to be believed. Maya looked up at him, her eyes full of something brighter than pride, understanding. The next week, the school principal announced a new unit would be added to the social studies curriculum, one focused on real-world legal cases involving civil rights, featuring guest speakers from the community. Judge Marcus James would be the first. Ms. Coleman volunteered to help lead it. The following month, Maya stood beside her father as he spoke to a gymnasium full of students, teachers, and families about fairness, courage, and listening, not just hearing, but listening, to every voice, especially the ones we're taught to ignore. Maya didn't just feel like a student that day. She felt like a seed, planted firmly in justice, watered with experience, and finally, ready to grow.